everyone and welcome back. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. This is Jiwon and you're listening to Understanding Korea, one story at a time, where we talk about Korean history, culture, and the very specific ways that they quietly shape our everyday lives. Today's episode is a book review episode, but it is also honestly a thank you letter to the people who keep the world from falling apart. Over the past few weeks, I have been writing a little series about something that sounds simple but turns out to be surprisingly deep: Korean warmth. Not just warm floors and hot soup, but warmth as a cultural logic. How Koreans connect warmth to health, care, and even basic common sense. And what happened next completely surprised me. I didn't expect those Korean warmth essays to become the most commented thing I have ever published. But they did. I share my newsletter across a few platforms, so when I publish, the comments come in from everywhere. Sometimes they appear right under the post. Sometimes generously people share my writing and add their own stories on top of it. Sometimes the response arrives as a DM or an email. The problem is that all of those comments scatter, and if I want to return to them later, it's surprisingly hard. So now I collect them. I save them by post and by theme, so the conversation doesn't disappear just because it happened in different corners of the internet. Because I learn so much from what you leave behind. Your comments teach me, challenge me, and often hand me details I never would have found on my own. And when a small idea of mine expands through your stories, when your lived experience takes it somewhere bigger, it's the kind of happiness that honestly gives me chills. And when I went back through everything after the warmth essays, I realized I have never received this many responses to a single idea. Not even close. Some were simple and deeply satisfying. Thank you, I understand Korea better now. But then something else happened. People began answering my Korea stories with their own stories. One reader told me about doing field work in rural Nepal, living in stone and mud houses with no heated floors, and yet the same haunting fear existed. Cold does not just feel unpleasant, it can enter you. In that community, woman offered woman mats to guests, not for comfort exactly, but as protection. And when someone seemed unwell, they would sit her near a clay hearth to drive the cold out. Like the hearth was not just heat, it was care. Another reader told me, basically, we have that rule too. In Russia, you simply don't sit on cold surfaces. It is understood to be bad for your health. No debate, no footnotes, just the quiet certainty of something learned through the body. And then a Chinese reader wrote a line that made me smile immediately. She said she struggles to explain what she means by "the wind has entered my belly." In her word, warmth is inner balance. Health is partly about protecting your body's environment from invisible intruders. In Korean medicine, we also talk about cold and wind entering the body, about protecting what's inside from the outside environment. That language isn't literal. It's a whole framework for thinking about health. Then she added a detail I loved. The Germans around her are also semi-obsessed with staying warm, but with different priorities. Germans make sure your feet don't get cold. She makes sure your head doesn't. And then someone else wrote from South Africa and said, basically, I cannot relate. In her word, ice is comfort. Cold water is care. A cold bath is how you bring down a fever. The idea that warm water is soothing when you're sick felt backwards to her, completely unnatural, which is exactly the point. Our common sense is not universal, it is local. And there was one message that made me laugh out loud because it sounded honestly like a warm-hearted parent's manifesto. She told me she used to drive a minivan too, back when her son was young. Cub Scouts, camping, the whole American childhood logistics package. One trip, she filled the back of that minivan with oak firewood, cases of water, hot chocolate mix, and other supplies. The other parents teased her for being overprepared. And then the temperature dropped below freezing. Everyone else had no cold weather supplies. Guess who became the most popular parent in the parking lot? She also told me that when her sudden freeze hit recently, she mailed her son and his fiancée an emergency radio, batteries, hand warmers, and an electric blanket. And then, like a perfect ending to a story that began with ondol, she added this. Her Korean tutor, a man in his mid-50s, gets a dreamy look on his face when he describes sleeping on heated floors. Same planet, different climates, different common sense. And yet, the same question running underneath all of it. How do we keep the people we love from harm? That flood of responses did something important for me. It reminded me that writing about Korea is not only about what is uniquely Korean. It's also about the places where a Korean story becomes a bridge. My newsletter and podcast are called Understanding Korea One Story at a Time. And I have been thinking a lot lately about what that word, understanding, actually means. I don't think it means building a museum. A museum is something you visit, observe, and leave unchanged. Understanding is more like a doorway. You walk through it, you end up somewhere new. Which brings me to this month's books. And if you are new to this podcast, here's a quick note. Once a month, I review a Korean book that hasn't been translated into English yet. This time, I'm doing the February pick a little later than usual, so you will hear the review in the first week of March. But first, there is something I want to say, because I think it's the right context for everything that follows. Korea is in the news for a lot of reasons right now. K-pop, K-drama, K-beauty, and most recently, impeaching a president and watching the same president receive a life sentence. But there is another thing Korea has become internationally known for, and it is considerably less fun. Korea has one of the lowest birth rates on the planet. I actually wrote a whole episode about this. It's called, So Is South Korea Going to Extinct or What? And the subtitle was, A Viral Tweet and a 13 million view video say yes. Korean history says, Hold my beer. I will link that essay in the episode notes. You've probably seen the headlines. Young Koreans, especially young Korean women, are opting out of marriage and parenthood at historically unprecedented rates. And honestly, I get it. In a world where kids don't just grow up anymore, where one child can require staggering amounts of money, time, planning, driving, emotional regulation, administrative labor, and plain stamina. Not having children can look like the most rational choice. And I say that as someone who used to believe exactly that. I was married for 13 years before I had a child. 13 years. For a long time, I genuinely thought bringing a child into this world might be a mistake. So I understand the people who decide not to have kids. I understand it deeply. Think about what we are asking children to inherit: the climate, the cost of housing, the particular exhaustion of living in a society that says it values families but structures itself in every possible way against them. And honestly, some days, all it takes is glancing at the news to wonder if justice even exists in this world. And I want to be honest about something else too. My husband and I were happy. We were genuinely, quietly, completely happy as two people building a life together. And I truly believe this. You can be fully happy, fully whole, with children or without them. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you that children complete you or that you are missing something if you don't have them. That's not what I believe. If you choose to have kids, I respect that. If you choose not to, I respect that too. Either way, you are enough, and your life can be complete. But here is where I landed. A first grader who says she is so excited to be alive and that she's going to be a mom someday too. I wasn't expecting any of that, the child or the feeling. The world makes having children unreasonably difficult. That's a structural problem, and it deserves structural solutions, not individual heroism. And yet, some people look at all of that, understand the cost fully, and still choose it. These books are about those people, not the fantasy version, not the greeting card version, the real version, with the exhaustion, the compromise, the guilt, the love, the moments when you genuinely cannot tell the difference between devotion and self-erasure. So that's the frame. Let's go find the books. This month was unusually hard to choose. I wanted a Korean book about care that matched what I had been writing about lately. Warmth, bodies, caregiving, the moral logic of looking after one another. There are many Korean books focused on care, especially elder care and illness care. There are also plenty about babies, postpartum recovery, and early motherhood as a kind of controlled chaos. But I couldn't find one that clicked with the particular emotional frequency of what I have been exploring. And then, by accident, I found a book in my neighborhood library. I live near Seattle, and I'm endlessly grateful that even here in the US, our local libraries carry a surprisingly generous collection of Korean books. I picked it up with almost no information. I saw the title, 돌보는 마음, The Caring Heart by Yudam. And I thought, okay, let's see what kind of care a fiction writer thinks is worth naming. I started reading that night. I kept reading until 1 a.m. And I want to tell you about this book first, because it sets the emotional tone for everything that comes after. The Caring Heart is a collection of short fiction about women in caregiving situations at home. And I want to be specific about what I mean, because women in caregiving situations sounds like a sociology paper. This is not a sociology paper. These are stories about the texture of care, the fingerprints it leaves. A daughter who has been looking after her aging mother for years, and all the unspoken negotiations that go on between them. A mother tending to a sick child while her own needs quietly accumulate. Woman navigating what I have started calling the invisible architecture of domestic labor, the work that organizes and enables everything else, and is never ever mentioned. What Kim Yudam does that I found remarkable is that she doesn't romanticize any of this. She also doesn't punish the caregivers for feeling tired or resentful or lost. She simply looks. She looks at the people who keep things running, the people whose labor disappears the moment it succeeds. Think about that for a second. When caregiving is done well, when the child is fed, the house is running, the sick person is comfortable, the homework is done. It becomes invisible. It looks like nothing happened, like it took no effort, like it was just the natural state of things. But it wasn't nothing. Someone made it nothing. Someone worked to make it look effortless. Yudam writes about those people, not as heroes, just as people. One more thing. For those of you who read in English and are curious about her work, Words Without Borders published a translated story of hers in 2025. So you can get a small taste of her voice even if you don't read Korean yet. I will include the link in the episode notes. And when I finished The Caring Heart, I did what any emotionally compromised reader does. I immediately searched for more of her work. That's how I discovered she had contributed an essay to a collection called 돌봄과 작업 2권, Care and Work Volume 2. It's a collection where women tell their own stories of raising children while continuing their work and learning how to hold both words at once, which meant, of course, I had to find Volume 1 first. And that's one accidental library book turned into a 3-book stack that quietly dismantled the Supermom myth without yelling at anyone and without offering a single how-to-do-it-all checklist. In other words, exactly my kind of book. Now, before I talk about what these essay collections actually say, let me slow down and explain the title because it's doing real work. The books are called 돌봄과 작업, Care and Work. 돌봄 means care, caregiving, tending, the act of looking after someone. And 작업 means work, but also making, craft, creative labor, the thing you produce. When Koreans say 작업, it can mean your job, but it can also mean your work in the artistic sense, the thing you build over time. And what I love about these books is that they do not treat these as separate words. They say care and work look like opposites, but they are both part of what makes a life. They also say something I find so honest. Creative work does not only happen in the quiet, isolated, perfect conditions we like to romanticize. It happens inside the busy, flowing life, which is the opposite of the fantasy we sell ourselves. You know the fantasy. Once I have a clean desk, 3 uninterrupted hours, and a fully evolved nervous system, then I will finally begin. These books laugh gently at that fantasy. Not because it is silly, because most caregivers do not get 3 uninterrupted hours. They get 15 minutes. They get tissue paper time. And that leads to one of the sharpest metaphors in Volume 2. A writer describes trying to write while caring for a newborn, and she remembers a senior writer saying, "A writer cannot write in tissue time. Writing needs roll time. Not a single delicate square of time you pull out carefully, trying not to waste it. A whole roll of time you can pull and pull and pull without panicking." That metaphor sounds funny until you've lived it. Then it becomes heartbreaking precise. So what are these 2 essay collections? Volume 1 has a subtitle that roughly means Women Trying to Become Mothers Without Losing Themselves. Volume 2 has a subtitle that roughly means women who chose to become mothers in their own way. Across these two volumes, you meet women whose jobs barely share a zip code. There are fiction writers, screenwriters, and nonfiction writers. There is a science and technology studies researcher thinking about knowledge and motherhood at the same time. There is a documentary filmmaker, and there is also a radio producer. There are teachers, there are people running community childcare cooperatives, there are women parenting children with disabilities. And what I want to emphasize is this. These are not how I do it all essays. These are not the glossy profiles that end with, and then she wakes up at 5 a.m. to meditate. These are essays that say, here is what it costs. Here is what I compromise. And these essays do not just describe care. They name the thoughts we usually swallow. So let me underline a few things these books do and why they stayed with me. First, they refuse the Supermom story. Not because it's annoying, but because it can be quietly violent. Volume 1 has a line that feels like someone finally saying what many mothers already know. Hero narratives do not fit parenting, because parenting is not a clean plot. One writer, John Eugene, says it plainly. She's exhausted by the cultural genre of alpha mom. The woman who supposedly succeeded at both career and motherhood and is now telling you how she did it. She says, essentially, no matter how much the story is beautified, the hidden pain still shows through, and it exhausts her. I think about this every time I see a certain kind of interview and a certain kind of magazine profile. The story is real, the achievement is real, but the framing, I did it all and here is the system I used to framing, hides something. It hides the cost, it hides the compromise, it hides the version of herself that didn't make it. These books reject that genre. They don't want to be a competition of suffering. Who had it hardest? They also refuse to be a how-to guide. No systems, no strategies, no 5 things that changed everything. Because here is what caregiving actually is once you are inside it. A situation where there is no single correct answer. The child changes, you change, the problem changes. The thing that worked Tuesday doesn't work Thursday. These books describe caregivers as people who hesitate, decide, try something, regret it, revise, and keep going. That's not failure. That's the job. Second, these books warn you about something our culture often praises: perfection. One writer describes reading a phrase that made her feel physical relief. A perfect parent is the greatest disaster. Now, before you panic, this is not saying that parents should not try or that children do not need care and attention. It's saying something more specific and honestly more frightening. A perfect parent can end up treating their child like a project to be optimized, managed, improved. And when you are in project management mode with a child, you stop actually seeing the child. You see the gap between where they are and where your plan says they should be. And children can feel that. They feel the management. They feel the evaluation. And they cannot relax because they are always potentially failing. And nobody wants to be loved like a project. Ji-hye writes about the relief she felt when she encountered this idea. She describes a particular kind of guilt that sneaks up in unexpected moments: midday, mid-sandwich, mid-ordinary Tuesday. The sudden ambush of am I doing enough? And she's slowly, with effort, learning to agree that not everything can be perfect. Not as a resignation, as an act of intelligence. Third, these books take a word we often hear as criticism, compromise, as they treat it as a method. If perfection is the trap, then compromise is how people actually survive. Im So-yeon is a researcher who spent years in academic spaces where the expectation was that serious scholars produce continuously, move internationally, present at conferences, publish in top journals, and also somehow be present for their families. She asked a mentor she admired, a senior scholar with 3 kids who moved between countries and still published. How did you do it? And the mentor's answer is not glamorous. I just got good at compromise. That sounds suspiciously simple until you become a caregiver. Then you realize compromise is not giving up. It's not lowering the bar. It's the daily craft of staying human under pressure. It is the art of deciding in real time what actually matters right now and letting the rest wait. And Volume 2 gives you the most brutally funny version of this idea. Jang Soo-yeon works as a radio producer and has 3 children. She says people love telling you to prioritize and focus. But when you are a caregiver, prioritize and focus is not advice. It's a prank. She hates it because it assumes a kind of freedom she doesn't have. When your child's hospital appointment falls on the same day as a work deadline, choose doesn't feel empowering. It feels absurd. You're not choosing between options. You're triaging between obligations. And she describes that lived reality, not as failure, but as the texture of the day. Schedules stacked like Tetris, running, sometimes even carrying a child, trying to clear the to-do list, only to end the day with items still left, because that's how it works. This is not a failure of organization. This is what a real day actually looks like. And finally, these books say something that sounds harsh until you recognize it as love. Boundaries aren't betrayal, they are care. Hong Han-byul writes about the moment she learned to draw a line between herself and her child's outcomes. Her child's success is something she can celebrate. Her child's failure is something she can comfort. But if she treats every success and failure as her own responsibility, if she fuses her identity with her child's performance, something terrible happens. Nobody left to hold the child. So she argues that separating yourself from your child is not abandonment. It is what makes you available. And then she goes further and says something that sounds harsh until you recognize it as truth. Every mother abandons her child, not because she doesn't love them, because separation is part of care. Because you cannot raise a person without letting them become a person. And that is where these books get quietly radical. They argue that love without limits is not purity, it's danger. Now, before I close, I want to talk about the fathers in these books for a moment. Because something is quietly shifting, and these essays capture it in real time. The traditional image of the Korean father, the one who is at the office until 10, who knows the children by name but not by habit, is present in these books. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But so is something else. Some fathers in these pages are clearly part of a generation in transition. One essay describes community co parenting, and the biggest unexpected beneficiary is her husband. He had lived in a world made almost entirely of work. Then childcare became his daily landscape. Neighborhood life entered his body. And at some point, he starts doing things he never would have imagined, like making 60 portions of side dishes for the communal rotation. And then he realizes what his wife meant when she said, "I'm doing my best." Not a slogan, not a personality trait, but the invisible work. The planning, the anticipating, the emotional load, the fact that she was already running at full capacity. Before he left it, he didn't have a framework for what that best actually cost. I thought about my home while reading this. When our daughter was a baby, my husband was the one who made all her baby food from scratch, something I never did once. I handled the laundry, cleaning, organizing, household logistics, and the hundred other things that keep a home from quietly unraveling. Now, my afternoons look like a small athletic tour. I pick my daughter up from the school bus stop and head straight to whatever enrichment class she has that day. Taekwondo, swimming, ice skating, lacrosse. Sometimes two activities in one evening. And let me defend myself here. I originally planned for one, maybe two after school activities. This is mostly my daughter's enthusiasm and persuasion campaign. I'm merely the driver. And when we finally get home, dinner is waiting. Often Korean food our daughter requested. Because my husband has cooked while we were out. He also reads to her in Korean every morning and every night, without fail. Her Saturday Korean school teacher told us her vocabulary is stronger than many kids her age who are actually living in Korea. That is largely his doing. So, no, our division of labor doesn't look like old Korean dramas. And these books reflect that shift too. Honestly, imperfectly, without pretending it's finished or universal. There are still plenty of bittersweet log moments in these pages. Women who feel strangely grateful that their husband do what is simply their fair share. And who know, even as they feel grateful, that the gratitude itself is a little sad. That the bar was low enough to be grateful for clearing it. But something is moving. These books are proof. And there's one last story I want to leave you with because it brought everything together for me. This is where it stopped being a book review in my body. Our daughter's friend recently became a big sister. My husband and I were talking casually about how hard that must be for the parents. They've already raised their older child to first grade, and now they are back in newborn land. We were saying they must be exhausted, and our daughter suddenly looked up, genuinely puzzled, and asked, "Why is taking care of a baby exhausting?" So my husband sat down next to her on the bed and started explaining. Babies have tiny stomachs, so they have to eat often, even at night. Diapers need changing constantly, and most of all, babies cannot talk. They cry, and parents have to figure out what the crying means. Is it hunger, sleepiness, a wet diaper, something hurts? And because babies are so small and fragile, you have to handle them carefully all the time. Then my husband added something from his own experience. When my maternity leave ended, he took parental leave and cared for our baby for 12 weeks. And he told our daughter that some days he would take a pizza out of the freezer, heat it up, and still not manage to eat even one slice properly. Because that's what babies do. They interrupt you right where you are. They make "I will eat in a minute" into a lifestyle. The vibe in the room was basically dad and first great daughter serious talk show. I was nearby doing my own thing, half listening, half smiling. And then our daughter suddenly threw her arms around him and said, "If taking care of a baby is that hard, you still chose to have me?" He hugged her back and said, "Of course, and taking care of you, the happiness was so much bigger than the heart." And she hugged him even tighter. I have been thinking about that moment ever since, because in one small exchange, a child stumbled into the truth that these books keep circling. Care is labor, care is skill, care is time. Care is 1,000 tiny acts that look ordinary from the outside and feel like a full body commitment from the inside. And the people who choose it again and again, without applause, without credits, without a tidy ending, deserve to have their experience named. Not as a heroic narrative with a clean victory, just as the truth of what they are doing. One teacher in these books spent 7 years on leave, raising 2 children with autism. She says the saddest moment wasn't the day she learned her children had autism. It was when she lost herself. She goes back to work. The family becomes, in her own words, several times happier. And she arrives at this: true caregiving is not throwing yourself away. It is protecting and loving yourself too. So this episode is my letter to mothers, fathers, grandparents, teachers, caregivers, co-parents, neighbors, friends who become family, and all the quiet people doing the work that keeps the world from falling apart. Thank you. The world is warmer because you exist, not only in temperature, in texture, in the way a home feels when someone has thought ahead, in the way a child grows up believing they are safe, in the way a sick body rests because someone else stayed awake. You're not background characters. You're not just doing what you're supposed to do. You're making the world more livable every day. Next week, I'm going to tell you about Korean postpartum care and why it reveals something bigger than tradition. It reveals what a society believes a mother's body deserves after giving life. Take care and thank you so much for listening. See you next week. 오늘도 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 주에 만나요. Bye!